Thanks so much for joining me today in conversation. To launch right into my first question to both of you, the Goa Familia project juxtaposes oral narratives and photographs, both of which have a very specific archival tangibility. Do you find that there is a need to employ more fluid methodologies as part of your process to accommodate these specificities of texture and tendency? And I think what was also interesting for me to ask you was that what has it been like to conceive of and create such methodologies that cater to the needs of the histories and personal narratives you've documented as part of this project?
Thank you so much, first of all, for having us here. And, it's really interesting for us to be looking at these histories at this point of time. Talking about methodologies, I think I would say that it's been like an evolving kind of methodology for us, because each and every family we met, probably we had to customize a lot of what we were doing. It's not one size fits all. It hasn't been like, okay, we have this framework and we'll visit people and talk to them. So, it's been quite a complex and challenging way, even though, we did have a framework for the logistical part of it. The interviewing process, the gathering of the material, talking to individuals and families has differed, really widely. And it's also connected with the fact that people are very protective about their own familial histories and, their ancestry. And having someone open it up and maybe, have this idea of taking it out into the world is sometimes a little worrisome. So, yeah, I think I would say very evolving. Akshay?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think we realized that the act of putting together such an archive is what gives birth to the many readings of it. Therefore, as Lina said, we chose to place the oral histories at the heart of the entire exercise. Just a simple act of recording these oral tellings of these albums, the reading of these photographs, both individually and together, side by side, placed in this album, gave birth to some multitudinous readings. So you used the word fluid. I think something that allowed us to record how the meanings of these photographs change in their telling, the physical photograph itself, and the act of remembering. I think so. These were all the central ideas that we used to create this sort of fluid methodology that we talk about.
With a landscape like Goa, the histories that suffuse it, that belong to it, are often so complex that they're too complex to be told through a single perspective. And unfortunately, this usually does end up being the case with history writing. So I'm curious about how Goa Familia approaches this idea of familial history, especially as it's something that intersects with histories of religion, identity, and colonialism, among others.
See, it was interesting to see how many times family histories become the structures of meaning and understanding that serve as the lens through which they view what is around them and the events that confront them. And the family photograph then became kind of a almost literal object of the lens of history. The kind of many analogous perspectives of the grand stroke of histories that become less contentious from the perspective of a family. So it was our job, I think, from the start. We thought it was best not to editorialize, but to present a diverse group of Goans, to present this contingency of things that make a Goan landscape. So one of the examples, you spoke to Mr. Estebiero, who on the face of things was as his job as the state photographer of Goa, both during the Portuguese times and during the Indian government, was that he would be kind of a great, almost an observer of history. But he himself was more preoccupied and more passionate about telling us about the overseeing the construction of the Goa's first Republic Day float or a Mando performance, right? Similarly, there was the Bharne family, and this shows how just a simple showing of albums can retract into a sort of almost onto a historic past, like the Bharne family who run this very popular clothing store in Ponji, and their almost an entire village and the entire family was sort of perished during the Great Plague of Old Goa, except for one daughter-in-law of the family who was pregnant and was visiting Saurde, and their entire line depended on this one woman. So it was all these interesting stories came out, which were personal, but I think in a large also speak to this Goan landscape that you talk about. Lina?
Yeah, very much so. As Akshay says, I think that Akshay, you also used the word remembering,
Yeah.
when you were speaking just now, and I think that we really have to remember that this entire body of material and all that material out there is also deeply connected to memory. And memory is something in itself so complex and so multi-layered. And how do we look at memory? So yes, of course, Goa's history is also in its way complex. The socio-political and cultural history, Goa's relationship with the rest of India and the world, the different experience of colonization, notions of identity and belonging, yes, very strongly, as well as also these entire mixes that happened within this landscape. So for us, I think that what we really tried to do was be objective, just as Akshay was saying. We tried not to be in a position of trying to validate anything or trying to adjust any bias, because those contradictions and conflicts exist in the background of everything. And we, through these conversations and through this gathering of material, we've been, I think, very privileged to enter into these narrow spaces. As Nancy Ajanya says sometimes, the histories that fall through the cracks, we've been able to come in contact with some of these alternative tellings through this lens of the album or the photographs. And for us, I think that that has been something very crucial in this entire project.
I was going to ask you next, which is that as material objects, there is an ephemerality that surrounds the photograph, and it's always subject to the effects of time and care. And within family collections, these objects of memory tend to occupy very precarious afterlives. So, in terms of the virtual domain and what it has come to offer us now, how do you see the possibilities of the processes of digitization, and how does this, if in any way, how does this tie into the way in which Goa Familia envisions its interactive, participatory archival space?
We, in fact, have been visiting families who have spoken to us about enormous losses of entire histories of albums through flooding or fire, shifting of entire families from place to place, uh, huge, traveling of material, because there is so much of Goan diaspora across the world. And so, we've seen ourselves albums that are shredding or, becoming yellow and tattering with age. So the very aspect of digitization, in one sense, allows us to bring all this into a preserved state, because we don't gather any of the physical material. We scan it and return it, photograph it and return it to the owners. And this material then is there for us and for everyone in posterity to be able to see, because after all, these photographs are records of times and lives. And this process has allowed us, though we have done something very small so far. It's just a year and a half we've been working on this, maybe around 2 years, forget about the whole 2020 situation. But it's been something that we've realized that this in a practical way, digitization is really important in many ways. And the other thing is the use of our social media platforms. So we do have, the wonderful Instagram channel and Facebook channel as well. And we've had these amazing responses from people of different generations, obviously, because different people use these platforms. And we've had really young people totally invested in their ancestry, going and talking to their grandparents, digging out these albums, scanning pictures and sending it to us. And in this process, they are also engaging with their own histories. And in that process, they are friends. And in this way, we are able to, reach out to so many other stories. So I think that these are some of the practical ways in which our project has worked.
I think what we realized while we were doing this, that I think that was that if we could bring the several protagonists that who build in building an archive into one room, whether that be physical or online, that is, the photographer, the photograph, the camera, the archivist, and the spectator, to record those resulting encounters. So, how do these sort of interactivities built on how do these old photographs coupled with these oral histories dredge up familial memories in the audience? In sometimes, in places through these interactions, whether it be online or at exhibition, we found that there were so many serendipitous connections that people had to sometimes long dead subjects of these photographs, and whether them being familial itself or just the connections between people we met who have come from completely different sections of Goan society, and they have sort of their stories sort of interact and intersect in these interesting ways. So each of these encounters kind of were not static, and we found that when we brought all these protagonists into a room is when we build that archive, so building the layer upon layer from that initial reading, which is the oral history. And that's what we sought out to do.